The Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, is refusing to intervene to help a Tamil family who face deportation to Sri Lanka after years of living in Australia as attempted refugees. The family is currently being housed on Christmas Island as lawyers launch a last-ditch legal effort to allow them to stay in Australia. Both children were born in Australia, but their parents have been repeatedly found not to be genuine refugees. A little earlier, I caught up with the Social Services Minister, Ruston, to discuss the New Start payment and the Cashless Welfare Card. But I began by asking her if she was comfortable with Scott Morrison's position on the Tamil family.
Well, look, as the Prime Minister said, and so has Minister Dutton, this particular family have been afforded every opportunity to demonstrate that they should be eligible for asylum and have failed to do so. And I certainly understand that, there is a lot of emotion out there in the community about this, but, they have, through every avenue that's been afforded to them and anybody else, not being able to demonstrate that they are eligible for asylum, and that is why the Prime Minister, I think, is holding such a hard line.
Labor frontbenchers Joel Fitzgibbon and Christina Keneally say the Prime Minister's approach to this issue is not very Christian. Do you think sending these people back is a very Christian thing to do? What's your analysis on this critique that they've provided, that it's not the Christian way to do things?
Well, look, I would never question anybody's Christianity or their belief, and I don't think that Mr Fitzgibbon or Ms Keneally should be doing so either. However, one of the things that we do know from really harsh experience is that if you don't hold a hard line and demonstrate to people, particularly the people smugglers, that we are not going to make any exceptions, we're going to hold a hard line, then the boats will start coming again. And, as we all know, and we saw those terrible pictures of children drowning at sea, I mean, that is something that nobody ever wants to see again. And if by holding a hard border protection line, we don't ever see that happen again, then I think, unfortunately, that is the price that we're going to have to pay to make sure that people don't drown at sea.
But, Minister, the government's been arguing today that the boats have been trying to come anyway, and that's regardless of this particular instance, this particular Tamil family. So what's the evidence that this family is the one that's going to crack the system?
It won't be any one family, but it's a demonstration by a government that's prepared to hold a hard line, to make the tough decisions, to send a message that, Australia has very tough border protection rules. And also, with 68 million people around the world seeking asylum, you have to make a decision as to who is able to stay and who's not. Now, this particular family, as I said, there's a lot of emotion around this, but at no time since they've been in Australia has the Australian government or anybody else ever indicated to them that they were going to be able to stay. Look, it is unfortunate. I understand the emotion, but the rules are the rules.
Well, let's talk about that emotion, because this is something that has clearly activated lots of parts of Australia, including the community where they were living. They were contributing to the community. We're about to talk about your own portfolio area where you talk about people getting into work, for instance. Given these people have wanted to live in this regional community and participate in the economy, aren't they the kind of people we want here?
Look, and they will be afforded, if they choose to make application to come to Australia by migration means that are suitable to their conditions. I'm sure that they are likely possibly to be accepted to come to Australia. But it's not about individual cases, as emotional as they may be. It's about making sure that you have a set of rules and you stick to those rules. Because I said, if we emotionally looked at every one of the 68 million or so people around the world who are currently seeking asylum, I'm sure every single one of those would have a very compelling case to come to Australia. But that's just not possible, and so that's why the rules are in place.
Minister, the government has been trialling the Cashless Welfare Card in Hervey Bay and Bundaberg since January. Last week you said the number of people on New Start in those areas has dropped by 9% to 10% compared to a national average of 5%. How many of those people have found jobs?
Look, it's hard to be really specific. At the moment, we're waiting for the data that's being currently collected in Bundaberg and Hervey Bay so that we can actually dig into that and see. We've made an assumption, I suppose, on the basis of the increased number of jobs that are available around the country and the number of people that have come off working age payments, that in these two particular areas, there's a very high chance that they will be, a substantial proportion of them will have gone into work. But I'm not saying that every single person who's come off a working age payment in Hervey Bay or Bundaberg has gone into work, but I think there is very much optimism in these early stages to suggest that a substantial component of them will have.
The public release of the data from the latest trial seems to have been delayed. Has it been delayed, and when will it be released?
No, not at all. I mean, the information will be released as it becomes available. We're currently doing a baseline study in Hervey Bay and Bundaberg because this trial only started earlier this year. But I think probably the thing that's been most impactful on me was when I visited the trial site last week, talking to the people who are actually on the ground, you know, the frontline services like the police. They're telling their stories, talking to the service providers and the interaction they're having with people who are on the card, but particularly the people who are on the card and hearing what their experiences were. That's the kind of information that has been really helpful in me, I suppose, being very keen to dig a bit deeper and see what the results are so that we can really get a very clear understanding of how well this card is actually working to assist people to be able to get on with their lives and create better lives for themselves and their families.
Minister, there have been problems with the data collection in previous trial sites to the point that it wasn't considered reliable. How have those data collection practices changed to ensure the data you're getting now is absolutely accurate?
Well, I know prior to my coming into this position that there was some criticism of some of the data being more qualitative than quantitative. So what we've done is to make sure that we are collecting data at a number of different levels. We're obviously working with the states in which the trial sites are occurring to get information directly from their frontline services because, you know, they're the people who are attending the domestic violence call-outs. They're the ones that are attending to the drunken disorderly, the teachers, the ones who understand whether the children are actually coming to school or not. And we need to get the data through the states at that level, but equally we need to look at employment levels as well as we need to look at and actually speaking to the people that are on the card and asking them firsthand what difference it has made to their lives.
According to the Orima report, which looked at the effectiveness of the card in Ceduna and Kununurra, the vast majority of people subjected to this cashless debit card don't have an addiction to alcohol, illicit drugs or gambling. So where is the evidence that the card is needed?
Well, I mean, the reason that we trialled this was because the communities themselves came forward and asked for it to be implemented in their regions. So obviously the communities, whether it be the local council and their local service providers and the like, obviously saw a need for it, and that was why they were rolled out in these 4 communities, was because it was by request. Now, I would suggest that the information that we have received through other means would indicate that there is a significant level in some communities of alcohol and drug addictions and gambling addictions, and we have seen significant reductions in the indicators of those things in discussions with police and with the information that we're collecting back from our social service providers on the ground.
You flagged replacing the Basics card, which is used in many communities, with this cashless welfare card. Would you like to see the card rolled out nationally for everyone on welfare? That was the original proposition, actually, by Andrew Twiggy Forrest in his report when the Abbott government was first elected. Is that a model you think might work?
Well, as you rightly point out, we're about to, subject obviously to the passage of the legislation, change the people who are currently on the Basics card in the Northern Territory and Cape York onto the CDC, simply because it affords them greater flexibility in what they're doing, because every shop or many more retail outlets will accept the CDC. But I think it's still too early. I haven't had the opportunity particularly to look at any of the data, the quantitative data that's come in from Hervey Bay and Bundaberg, and I think we all need to sit down, have a look at the data from all of the trial sites, get the transfer rolled out in the Northern Territory and Cape York, and then we need to go out and we need to consult with communities to find out what it is that they particularly like. One thing that was loud and clear coming out of Bundaberg and Hervey Bay is that community out there, I think, would be more outraged if we actually took the CDC out of their community than anything that I was imagining. I mean, they're very, very clear. The other thing that they were telling me is that there are a number of people in their communities who have actually actively come in and sought voluntarily to go on the card. I think we need to look at all of it, all of the data, anecdotal, qualitative and quantitative, and then sit down and have the conversation.
Minister, the government continues to resist calls to increase Newstart. Do you accept that because of inflation for people on Newstart, it's essentially rising at a higher rate than for the rest of the community, 1.9% versus 1.6%? People on Newstart are actually experiencing a decline in their living standards. Do you accept that?
Well, as I have been saying constantly, the Newstart allowance is a safety net, and it is but one of the things that the government is doing to assist people who are currently unemployed to be able to get out of their vulnerabilities that they currently have because they're on unemployment benefits and get them into a job. Our responsibility doesn't stop at providing that safety net. Our responsibility involves making sure that we create jobs, and I think we've got a pretty good track record of that.
Sure, but my question is, do you accept that their living standards are declining right now?
The unemployment benefits, as with all of our other income management payments, and including as well as the age pension, are indexed twice yearly to reflect the cost of price index, and that is something that's always been in place. But as I said, it's much more important that we get people off these payments and into a job.
Sure, Minister, but a quarter of those on Newstart are people over the age of 55. Many of those statistically won't get another full-time job. You've announced 48.5% million, a program to help vulnerable people find work. How much of that will be directed towards people over the age of 55?
Well, two things. People over the age of 60 do already get a supplement on their payments, recognising that sometimes older Australians do face greater barriers to employment than younger Australians. Of the 48.5, which is part of the $96 million that we've allocated to the Try, Test and Learn, which is a raft of measures that are looking at all sorts of different cohorts that sit within the unemployed category to work out what are their particular barriers to employment. We have a number of them that are focused on older Australians. I would have to take on notice the exact number, but there are a number of programs already in play and some that we've announced today that focus on older Australians. I mean, one very good one was in relation to older women who are particularly suited and enjoy working in the aged care sector, and how we can work with them so that we can build up a huge need that we currently have for a workforce in the aged care sector.
Minister, you mentioned when people turn 60, they get this higher amount. Would you consider, I know you can't commit on this program, but to looking at whether people at 55, for instance, should have access to that higher amount?
Look, one of the things that I am absolutely focused on is actually looking at all of the barriers that people who are unemployed find to getting into work. And if I can come up with a mechanism or a program that would assist people over the age of 50, over the age of 55, over the age of 60 to be able to get into work, I'm more than happy to consider any of those initiatives and trial them, because of course what we want to do is we want to see people working, we want to see people having a better quality of life, and that goes for all Australians. But you know, we understand particularly that older Australians sometimes are a little more vulnerable than other Australians.
So Minister, specifically on that higher amount that you said people get at 60, do you think it's worth looking at or modelling whether people should have access to that from 55?
I'm happy to look at anything, but as I said, my absolute focus has been on trying to work out why people are finding it difficult to get into work. As we know, 2/3 of people that go on Newstart get off Newstart very, very quickly. It's the third that are finding it more difficult, and what are the barriers of that third that I'm very interested in focusing on.
Minister, thanks so much for coming on the show.
My pleasure.
That's the Social Services Minister, Anne Ruston. And this is RN Drive. What do you make of this case? Should the government intervene? Or perhaps you see it their way. The Prime Minister says they can't make this exception. It will start the people smuggling trade again. 0418